All right, let's get started. So welcome to another installment of frameworkless.js. So I'm Mike, if you haven't been following along. And I apologize for the background today, and also maybe the lighting in here if you're looking at the little corner of where my talking head is. I wish it was better, but at the moment I'm in a Skype room in a working in like a co-working space. So there's no windows in here. And today we're going to be going through front-end stuff. So we're not going to focus too much on the actual front-end code in terms of reactive UIs or anything like that. We're going to focus on how to build in front-end assets into our server properly, and so that you can focus on those things. So let's leave these two old bags that are sitting here enjoying this fake roller coaster and move along. So far we've created a Node.js app and we've hooked up a static HTTP server to it. We also implemented dynamic routing along with handlebars templates for the routes. We wrote a data parser for form data, and we connected up a database, Postgres, and wrote some nice raw SQL queries on our own and put them into the actions folder. And just a reminder of what we're actually building, that's this thing, Remindist, and it's essentially a tool that you can time machine yourself in the future, basically send yourself a message on the 30th of August, for example, and when you hit submit, it'll schedule an email for you and it'll be sent to you, within 3 weeks, I guess. So that's what we're building, and this app is entirely built with no frameworks whatsoever and entirely built in plain JavaScript Node.js. So that's kind of what we're doing, what we've been building this whole time. And we're going to be working on the front end a bit today. So first of all, I mean, it's super nice that our app works and everything, but I don't know about you, but I also like visual results as well. And it's nice when an app kind of looks the part a little bit when you're working on it. So the UI is a little bit more than just ugly default browser style buttons and so forth. So yeah, let's see what we can do with that today. And the next stream in 2 weeks is going to be the last stream of the series. So we're going to write a cron job to actually do the mailing. So send the email at the right time to the right person. And also we're going to hook it up to a mailing server. So we're going to use Mailgun, but you could use, Mandrill or SendGrid or whatever it is that you want to use. But yeah, we're just going to use Mailgun because, I personally like Mailgun. And then after that, we're actually going to launch. We're going to launch on Product Hunt, and it'll be fun. So without further ado, let's talk about front end. So I think a lot of frameworks out there, a lot of sort of full-featured frameworks obstruct a lot of the difficulty that comes with writing front-end code. And I think maybe a lot of developers are also not familiar with how crazy it actually is writing code these days for the front end. And the reason is that, browsers are all over the place. Rendering engines do what they want sometimes. And basically, you are left with few other options besides having to go through complicated build steps in order to make your code work across all platforms. So there's basically three approaches of how you can solve the problem. The first is, say, screw to all those browsers, like screw off. You could, of course, do that. You could write front-end code using super old JavaScript and CSS at the lowest possible standard, which is a frightening concept for anyone that, likes their job as a developer. And then the third option is basically what everyone's doing these days, which is have a pre-compilation step for their JavaScript and CSS assets. So they would write their JavaScript or CSS in their language of choice. Like, for instance, one really popular one right now is TypeScript. So TypeScript does not run in your browser, but when you write TypeScript, it gets compiled into regular JavaScript that can run in the browser. But you write, of course, in TypeScript, or back in the day, it used to be CoffeeScript, was pretty popular. And there's lots of other tools out there for those kinds of things. So we're going to be using some of those sort of base level tools, libraries that are out there. And we're going to be implementing what's called the asset pipeline. So what is a pipeline? A pipeline is something that takes an entry file, so a CSS or a JavaScript file, and either creates a static asset out of it. So for production purposes, you would want a static asset. And in the case of a development environment, you just basically want to watch for changes and refresh your app every time that it's running. So we're going to create a sort of asset pipeline that stores that file in memory instead of as a file system file. So we're not messing around with versioning assets and that kind of stuff. So what we're actually going to do is essentially create a build step. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Heroku platform, but a lot of apps are actually doing this as well. A lot of different hosts. That's basically creating the 12-factor app, and there's a lot of things that go into a 12-factor app, but one of them is that when you build an app, and a lot of those setups, you use what's called a build pack, which configures the Node.js application or Node.js for you, and installs NPM modules and everything, and then the app is deployed at the end of that. So the 12-factor app is essentially that the app can run separate from some of the things that it counts on, and also the configuration of its environment can be configured separately from the app itself. But I digress a little bit. So Heroku uses what's called a build pack in order to know what to do in order to launch a Node.js app. So what that build pack does is installs Node.js. It uses the most relevant version of NPM. It installs your NPM modules, and then finally, recently, it's also doing a build step. So it will run npm run build if you have an npm run build set. So that is really great because that can help you build static assets for your app, and then you don't have to build some kind of convoluted system to do this yourself. And on the development environment, we're going to have the assets compiled but served from memory so that they don't create anything on the file system, and therefore they function a little bit more efficiently for that use case. But you wouldn't want to do that in production because it doesn't work as well as a static asset in that instance, because it doesn't need to change. So to do that, we're going to install a whole bunch of packages. Now, the sad cat face maybe shows like how many packages we have to install, but it's actually kind of important because we can go through and talk about what each of these does. So Babel is a transpiler. What Babel does is it takes your modern JavaScript and it downgrades it so you don't have to write crappy old-fashioned JavaScript that works on Internet Explorer, blah, blah, blah. So Babel is a huge friend to anyone who likes to write modern JavaScript. And Browserify is something that will resolve your modules. So for example, if you import a module like some kind of module in your JavaScript code, Browserify will create a module system out of it and allow you to basically still compile it into one file. Babelify is a plugin that works with Browserify and with Babel and connects the two of them so that they work fairly seamlessly. And Uglify is something that will take your JavaScript code and mangle it a little bit and reduce its file size by making it quote-unquote ugly, so less human readable and just focusing on machine readable, so that the assets don't need to look great. They're just being served to the users of your app. Then the second build step I separated out by CSS and JavaScript. So the second one installs PostCSS, PostCSS CLI, which will allow us to run the PostCSS command from the command line. PostCSS import that allows us to use import statements and actually ends up doing something similar to Browserify for JavaScript, which is create modules and put them all together. PostCSS Node Sass, because we like to use, or I personally like to use, the Sass syntax, so we're going to be using that. And PostCSS URL that takes URLs and resolves them in your CSS, so that can be pretty useful. You don't have to use any of these rule sets, for example. I prefer Sass rules myself, but maybe, or SCSS I should say, but maybe you're, I don't know, you prefer some other sort of CSS rules, that's fine with me, but you just have to adjust your stuff accordingly. And one note is that we are installing them as dependencies and not dev dependencies. Now you might be thinking, why is that the case? Well, it's because on our production environment, when we deploy our app, we need to run the build step there. So we will need to run npm run build on your deployment server. For this reason, we can't install them as dev dependencies because those are removed in a non-development environment. Or they can be. They often are. So you can't count on those modules being there, and you're going to get errors if you try to run npm run build and you put these front-end assets things into the dev dependencies. So we are just going to put them into regular dependencies and call it a day. All right, so let's get started. So let me open up my editor here. So here I am. I'm going to delete my package lock and my modules directories because I've been tinkering around, so I'm just going to delete these. You obviously don't have to do this, but I'm going to run npm install just to make sure I have all my modules properly set up. Yeah, it's a lot of work putting together course content. You find yourself, one interesting thing that I've learned is you end up rewriting a lot of your course content, which is quite funny. So I've rewritten, for example, this stage or this stream's content several times in order to make it work properly. So anyways, I'm going to install these JavaScript things first. There we go. So while that's installing, I'm going to copy the CSS ones and be ready to install. Yeah, like I said, you can install them all as one, but I'm installing them in 2 batches because I wanted to demonstrate the JavaScript ones versus the CSS ones. All right, so still installing. This stuff takes a while to install because you can imagine like Babel being the core piece of it. Babel is a pretty complicated piece of software because it has to transpile your code. That is a lot of work and a lot of modules basically depend on that. Yeah, some of the other ones that we're installing, so the polyfill will allow you to use language features that are essentially need to be polyfilled, aka need to be filled into the browser when it doesn't have those things in there. So a lot of things, for example, on the arrays, on the regular array object in the browser, there might be some things missing. So it fills in those functionalities onto the array constructor object so that you don't have to do that manually, individually yourself. Okay, anyways, we've installed all that stuff. Let's move on to the next page. So let's open up a responder file. If you remember, the responder is where we serve our static files and we serve our routes. So this is where we ideally want to start hooking in our functionality for the pipeline. So to do that, I'm going to import all these modules here. So you'll see that I'm importing everything that, almost all the modules that we installed in the previous step. And I'm also importing this node.env environment variable. This is used pretty standardly to define whether you're running on production or not, for example. So yeah, so all that stuff's in there now. And now I need to add a new serve function because a static file, if it's being served out of a pipeline, is not a static file anymore. It's a file that doesn't exist on the file system. It's being served from memory, essentially. Or it's being served from a place that you wouldn't necessarily place a regular static file. So in this case, we need to create some custom code for it to be able to be served. And this stuff will only be really relevant for us if we're on production, or sorry, not on production, because this functionality is useful for development, but it's not so useful for production. It'll slow things down. So just to walk through what we're doing, we are initiating a post CSS instance. We are plugging in the Sass language or Sass rules into it. We are then making it sure that it respects imports properly and that it turns URLs that we use in our CSS into inline things. So for instance, it will take your SVGs, for example, and inline them instead of linking to them, offsite. The next thing is auto prefixer, which handles some of the more esoteric browser features by prefixing them with like WebKit or Mozilla, Firefox, or whatever, in order for those to work properly. And the last step is the process step. So that basically says, take our file and make sure to include node modules. Now, the reason we do this is because we might want to import style sheets from a module we install, and we'll get around to that later, actually. We're going to use a module or two that we install, so then we can go through this a little bit more at length. And that's for the CSS. So for the JavaScript, it's very similar. We are essentially calling on Browserify, which is the tool that compiles all the modules together. We are then applying a transform to it, which is Babelify. And Babelify, if you remember, handles the transpiling step. So it's a wrapper around Babel that works with Browserify. So it also is using the preset env, which is an environment that you're presetting. So you're telling Babel what browser versions you want to support. So the default one is fine for the moment, so we're just importing it, and we haven't really configured it much, but there it is. Finally, we're bundling it all into one file, and we are piping it as a response, aka we are giving back a live or a stream of the file in question. So as you see here, we're not actually running this anywhere yet, and that is the next step. We need to actually hook this into our pipeline, or into our static asset server. So inside of the try block in serve static file, because this is where CSS and JavaScript files are going to go through, we need to include some additional logic. So first of all, at the very beginning, we should include this thing that tests to see if we are dealing with a pipeline asset or not. So this is very simple. It will not work on production, so it'll be false on production. And additionally, it looks for files that are either CSS or JS extensions. So this means that only CSS and JS files will be converted into a pipeline asset, and everything else will be left alone and ignored. The next step is the path is going to be different depending on whether the file is a pipeline asset or not. So in the case of a pipeline asset, we're going to serve it from a different folder than the public folder. And in the case of the file being an image or any of those other wonderful things that are in our public folder, for those cases, we need to, like the site manifest file, the fav icon, and the error page and so forth, we need to serve those from the public folder. So that's basically what this is all doing. So the file handle stuff we will leave as is, except we need to switch out real path here instead of the path variable that we're putting together, because that is redundant to here. And the last thing is we need to serve the pipeline asset function instead of the regular response in the case of a pipeline asset. So here we're going to go right before we, not here, after the headers, we're going to tell the function to return the serve asset from pipeline in case we are looking at a pipeline asset. So that about does it, and that's really all we need to do in order to incorporate static assets. The next step is, of course, going to be creating the entry files for these. But before we do that, let's focus on our scripts. So as I mentioned earlier, the new build pack, the newest version of the build pack for Node.js, this is used by Heroku and some other platforms, like, for example, Doku, and I think probably a lot of other build systems. They use npm run build as a sort of stock thing in order to build front-end assets. And in this case, we're going to add 4 new scripts that are run in the order of pre-build is run before build. In case you didn't know, Node.js actually runs, or npm runs, any scripts that have a pre in front of them before whatever that name of the thing is. So if it was called pre-build, it's going to be run before build. If the task was called start, you would have a pre-start. Whatever is in pre-start would be run before start. Right? So in this case, so the pre-build task removes the style.css folder or file and the app.js file. And these are both in the public folder. Now, as I was saying earlier, this is basically for the production environment. So on the production environment, if there is already a copy of style.css or app.js, we want to remove those and replace them with ones that we're going to generate right now because they're generated of the latest version. So that's why we're deleting the old ones, just to make sure there's no conflicts anywhere. And then the actual build step is the run build CSS and run build JS. Now you see run build CSS is just the post CSS command, and it tells us what the entry point is and what plugins to use and what the output file should be. Notice that this public style.css file corresponds to the one that we removed in the pre-build step because, if the old one is there, we don't want to try to overwrite it or append to it or anything like that. And then lastly, build.js, we're issuing the browserify command. We're using the Babelify plugin with the Babel preset env. Then we're uglifying, and the output file is in the public folder, same as the JavaScript that we talked about earlier. It's this one here. And it comes from assets.js, app.js. All right? So as you may have guessed from reading this, we need to create an assets directory, and from there a CSS directory and a JS directory, and then an app.js and a style.js. Blah. That's a lot to say. Okay, so let's get to that and run this command. So we're going to create a directory called assets.css in our root folder of our application. Same with JavaScript. So now we have an assets folder, as you see here, and they're at the moment empty. And we're going to create in the JS folder an app.js file. So these files are served to the front end, right? So these are not backend Node.js files anymore. And inside of that file, let's put some dummy text with a console log just to make sure that it's working. And the last one is, of course, style.css to make sure that the style sheet is working properly. Here we go. Okay, so in the scenario that these things are working, we should get a console log alert that says, wow, this is working, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. And the background of the page should be the hot pink that we like to use in this course with white text. Excuse me, that shouldn't be hot pink. Maybe it's more of a fuchsia, but I will let you argue about that. I love colors, but I have better things to do in this stream than to argue colors, but I'd love the discussion if you want to talk about it. Anyways, and then the rest of it is kind of quite lengthy. So I put it into a gist, so you can just go to this gist. But in the meantime, let's go to our application. So let's get on that. So I'm going to run npm run start. And if everything went correctly, it'll be loaded. There we go. And of course, our styles are not in there, and neither is our console log command. And that's because we haven't included the style sheet or the CSS, the CSS or the JavaScript on the page yet. So that's the next step. Let's go into our template file and include the style sheet. So you see up to this point, we've been using a style tag. We are instead going to do link rel equals style sheet, and what is it? Href equals, and we are pointing to the public folder, and we want style.css. So if our stuff worked with the pipeline, this should be a little bit different. Maybe we need to restart our app in this case. Oh, nope, something is not working. Let's see what happens when we load this file up. Oh, right, it's not in the public folder. There we go. I'll restart the app. There it is. Ah, that burns my eyes, but it works. Now let's try out the JavaScript. So we'll delete this tracking code here and write script src blah 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 script, and we want app.js. So we should ideally see a message in our console, wow, this is working, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, and this means that our pipelines are indeed in place. So, actually, speaking of that, let's take a look at what the files actually contain. If you look at app.js, there it is. So this is a little bit of Babel or Browserify code and Babelify code and everything like that. But you see that those both have worked their magic, and they've turned your awesome ES6 fat arrow function into a regular function and so forth. So it's transpiled it already. And as for the CSS, let's take a look at the CSS. Yep, there's our asset directory file, and what's in it is essentially what we defined in our style.css. Alright, but of course we don't want to stop here, because this is a pretty ugly app so far. This hot pink is, or hot fuchsia, or maybe cold fuchsia, I don't know, isn't really doing it for me at the moment. So I'm going to take a sip of water. And we're going to fix this up a bit. So like I said, I put some of the code into a gist here. Gist is just GitHub's service for hosting files. So start with, so there's a number of files in here. There's base.scss, and we maybe start with that. So we're going to create a new file in here called base.scss. I'm going to stick the contents of the, stick the contents of that in there. All right. Next, we want to create a file called form.scss. This deals with the styling of the actual form elements. All right. And next, we want to create a the content for new reminder.handlebars has changed a little bit, and this is one of our template files, if you remember correctly. So we'll put some more styled and neat content there. Next, we need to change our root.hbs file, which is our homepage. So go in here, change that, ta-da, and I believe there's still a little bit of work done. Yes, the main template. So we also need to change around the main template a little bit, so you can just copy and paste this. Now the changes that I made here are very superficial. I've included a fancy font from the Google font library. There's obviously some styles and a little bit of this and that in there, but nothing too drastic. Feel free to look through it. It's nice and easy to do in the gist. And finally, this variables.js, variables.scss. So here we're basically defining what the font family, the font size, and so forth is. And lastly, we've created all these SCSS files. We now need to import them and make sure that our app is using them. So in our style.css, let's replace these body rules that we used for testing with this fantastic import statement stuff. So we're including the variables, which are defining some of the base colors and font settings. Then the base coat of paint, essentially, which is using Flexbox and how the footer should look like and so forth. Then finally the form elements. So if we maybe restart the app, we should be able to see a better looking application. There, see? That looks great, doesn't it? It's already a huge difference. So it's actually starting to look like a real app. I didn't spend a ton of time putting this design together, but I hope you like it. It's really simple. And if you don't like it, please submit a pull request in the repository. I would love to merge in your awesome design changes. I like to think I'm a bit of a designer, but yeah, I'm sure there's many of you that are better than me. So please submit something if you want to. So now let's take a little step here and think about what we've got. We've got a app running now. We have our front end pipelines working. We have tasks for the production environment where we're going to build the assets so they don't get served out of memory. And our app looks a lot better and a lot cleaner and like a real application as opposed to before. So let's test it out. So I'm going to put in my email address, and of course we need to put in when we want to receive the notification, and so forth, blah, blah, blah. You'll notice there's a few things here that are not great. So first of all, it'll be probably nice to format this timestamp here. And another thing is that it would be nice that there's a bit of a date picker here. You see, there's not really a nice way of doing this date picking. So, well, this is actually a great little opportunity to add on to our app, because there's a library called date picker, and I call it a library, not a framework, because it's not a framework. Yeah, it's called date picker. I think this is the one. No, there was another one. Date picker. Oh, that's annoying. I meant to link the file, but or the website, but I guess I forgot to do that in the notes, so I apologize. I'll find it on NPM, and then we can look at the README together. But this isn't a hugely mind-altering little module. All it is just a little date picker tool that creates, yeah, you see here in the notes, you essentially create a date picker. And a date picker, if you want to know what I'm talking about, looks like this. So when you select the date, you get this nice interface to select the date instead of having to type it in, in some kind of weird user-unfriendly format. So let's see if we can, I think it's this one. Yeah, Tristan, I think, is the dude that built this. Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Anyways, regardless, it doesn't matter who built it. I can link that later. I seem to have lost the URL for it. But anyways, what we want is we want the date picker to work in this when box instead of having to enter manually yourself all of this stuff. So to that end, let's install the module. So this will be our test of how to actually implement modules in our app for the front end, not just the back end. And yeah, we're using the date picker, and the date picker comes with its own styling. So as you see here on our Remindist website, there's styling attached to this. So there's, obviously we need to import maybe some of that. So to do that, we just need to import the style sheet from the Node modules folder. So let's stick that at the bottom of our style.css file. And now you might understand why in our serve asset from pipeline we included the Node modules directory, because we're doing exactly what we're doing here, which is that we are importing a CSS file from the Node modules directory, right? So we need to make sure that that's available to the compiler for the CSS. So the next step is we need to initiate the flat picker in our JavaScript as well, because it's a front-end JavaScript a module. So here we're importing the flat picker from the module, and then we are using this init function, which I personally like to use myself because it's a great way of organizing all of your code to initialize. So what are we doing in here? We are grabbing a query selector of all elements that have the flat picker class, and then we're looping through them and initializing a flat picker on them, so an instance of flat picker, and then we're just setting a minimum date of today, of right now. And the reason we do this is because, well, you don't want to send a reminder to yourself in the past. Our time machine only goes forward, not back, so we can't send an email to ourselves to the past, only to the present and future. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's start up our app. So if we did everything correctly, we should have a date picker here. Oops, we did something wrong. Oh, did I run install on Flatpicker? No, I didn't. That was silly. Oh, Flatpicker, that's why I couldn't find it. I'm an idiot. That's why I couldn't find it. Here, flatpickerjs.org. That's the one I meant to use. No wonder it didn't remember in the browser history me looking this up. Anyways, this is the module I wanted to use. It's pretty simple to use. I don't know why I was thinking date picker, but there you go. All right. So now if everything's working correctly, there we go. And our date picker doesn't work. Now, why not? Oh, I know why. Because we need to add a class to the input element where we want to use it, right? So as you remember in the app.js file, we grabbed everything with the class flatpicker, and then we apply a flatpicker to it. But it needs to have a flatpicker class. So let's go in and do that. So this input type here, just add a class flatpicker. So now I'm going to refresh the page, and voila, we have a wonderfully functioning flatpicker here. Okay. So let's test out, make sure everything still works. Yep, everything's still working. But then the next thing that I kind of want to fix is this date display. So nobody likes ISO timestamps. They're not really pretty to look at, right? So, I mean, they do tell you exactly when this thing's going to be sent, but it's not a very user-friendly way of displaying it. It's a whole bunch of nothing in there as well. Like, for instance, you could write the time zone a little bit nicer than GMT plus 8, you know? Maybe there's a different way of formatting it. One particular format that I like to use is the time ago format. So when something needs to be basically displayed as Mike posted this 5 days ago, you know, as opposed to Mike posted this on the 18th or 17th of August. So it helps people kind of remember when and what happens when you're telling them how many days ago rather than the actual date. So in order to make that happen, there's actually another great module called Time Ago. And this was written by HustCC on GitHub. And all it is it's just a module that does exactly that. So you stick a date stamp into it, and it tells you that something happened 12 seconds ago or 2 years ago, and it also does it for the future as well. So it does in 3 minutes, in 24 days, in 6 months. And we are going to utilize this simple functionality. And of course, we could stick it into our front end in the sense that we could put it into our JS, app.js bundle. But that seems like a weird way of doing it when we could actually just do it in our handlebars. So the next thing I thought we could do is implement handlebar helpers, which are a great way of reusing functionality in handlebars. So most templating languages out there, like handlebars or Liquid or Pog, allow you to reuse common functionality. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So if you want to read more about handlebars and handlebar helpers, you can go to handlebars.js. This is great news. They're redoing their documentation site. I always kind of hated their docs, or at least their homepage. It's really nice to see that they're redoing it. That's fantastic. Oh, and there's a draft available. I am so excited. Okay. Okay, so it's got a guide now. It's got some sections. That's nice. All right, well, yeah, it looks good so far. Anyways, that's I digress a bit. But a helper is essentially a function that you call by calling it in the template. So in this case, for example, the function will be called time ago, and I'm passing in a date stamp into it. And then we define it here by saying that the format function from the timeago module is going to be what we are running when we do this. So to do that, a few steps are necessary. First, in our lib folder, let's create a handlebar helpers file.js. And in there, we can nicely insert the code that you see on the top of the page here, which is, requires in the timeago.js module. Oh, which, by the way, we have to install first. And so now, essentially, it exports this timeago function that maps over to timeago.format. Right, I hope that's clear. Otherwise, please shoot me a note. And then in the new reminder template, we're going to utilize the timeago helper here instead of just spitting out this ugly date stamp. So that just altering it by adding the timeago helper designation here. And the last step is we currently don't have any functionality to insert those helpers. And what we're going to do is inside of our responder, we're going to add that functionality in. So after this line, so what are we doing here? We're importing the handlebars helpers file from, here. And then we are looping through all of its exported objects, and we're running handlebars.register helper. We're using the name of the helper, aka the name of the exported function, so in this case it'll be timeago. And we are attaching the function that it exports as the helper itself. So so that's essentially it. And now I need to run this. Great. So if I refresh this page, ta-da! Look at that. Remind you in 2 weeks instead of ugly ass timestamp from our database. It now says 2 weeks. And assuming that's correct, I don't remember when the date was. Assuming that's correct, everything is going well. So let's just take a moment and laugh at this GIF first of all. This thing lets you search Giphy GIFs, and I was looking for beautiful because I wanted to originally find something that was like really aesthetically pleasing, and then I'm kind of a sucker for these ridiculous GIFs, and this one is definitely ridiculous. Also, the color almost matches the brand color for frameworkless, so I kind of had to use it. Anyways, so we look at our app that we built. It's actually pretty awesome so far. It's styled to look in a decent way. We've got it all broken out into pipelines. It works insofar as to enter the data and store it. We haven't built the mailer portion yet. That'll be next stream. The whole thing kind of has come together pretty nicely, I think. So take a moment and pat yourself on the back because you've built pretty much like 90% of this Node.js app already without using any frameworks. We've used little things here and there. We use this little flat picker, not date picker, but flat picker. We use timeago, we use handlebars and stuff. But for the most part, we've pretty much avoided steering clear of the overbearing frameworks or building out MVCs or doing anything like that. And we've kind of crafted something in the most basic pattern possible. We're using what we called actions, but they're essentially just reusable database logic. We've used essentially views, and I guess the routes can count as a controller, but essentially it's just a definition for what the route should be. And we have a static file server, which is actually not as simple as it might seem to build, as we spent a whole session on doing that. So that was something. And then there was a security patch by a enthusiastic viewer as well. Anyways, thanks for hanging out with me for these last 45 minutes. So this is the second to last session. There's one more left after this where we're actually going to wrap this all up and build the app out. And we're going to be working on adding the email functionality, and we're going to build a cron job, essentially another executable file in our directory that will send the actual emails. And we're going to run that however many times every once in a while in order to send those emails on time. As always, you can reach out to me on Twitter, and also feel free to join the Telegram group. There's, I think, 9 people in there. There could definitely be more. And yeah, if you need any help, if I'm going too fast, too slow, the Telegram channel is the best way to contact me. Following that, Twitter. And as always, again, all of the source code for today is available on GitHub. So there's a link right there. So it's the frameworkless.js repository, remindist, and you're looking at the stage 5 branch. And you can see today's code running live in the browser at part5.remind.ist. And yeah, that about does it. So the next stream is going to be, let me check the calendar, on the 20th of August. So same time, 20th of August, it's 1500 Bali time. I'm in Bali at the moment. 7 o'clock UTC/GMT. I think that's 9 o'clock in Amsterdam, CEST. Unfortunately for my friends in the United States and Canada, it is the middle of the night, but that's what I guess the replays are for. But yeah, I hope you have a great week, a great 2 weeks, and a great day. And yeah, I look forward to doing our last session together. Last time. Okay, bye.